I'm looking back at my pictures now, organizing them in albums and writing down, notes and stuff before I forget. And just, I don't consider myself a nature photographer by any means, but I mean, just the pictures, it's amazing, what all you see there. I guess I didn't really know, because it was sort of like I said, on a lark that we chose to go because it was one of the few places we could go. I was like, oh, this is why this revolutionized evolution and, it's such an amazing destination.
Well, hello and welcome once again to the DCL podcast, where we're inviting you to sit back, relax, and we'll be on our way shortly. Well, welcome back to the DCL podcast, your podcast helping your family cruise a little smarter when the ship starts sailing. And I'd like to welcome back to our show our wonderful co-host down there in Florida. She's never going home. How you doing today, Christy?
I am well. How are you, Steve?
Not too bad. Hey, what do you think we go on an adventure today?
I think it's a great idea.
And if you were going to adventure anywhere in the world, where would that be?
You don't tell me how to prepare for these. Am I supposed to say the topic? Am I supposed to? Where do you want me to go with this, Steve?
Where do you want to go today? Where do you want to go?
I want to go to the Galapagos.
The Galapagos. And this is just amazing. Sometimes there's this currents of rivers come together, and Disney just released their expedition cruises through ABD, and at just about the same time, I was texting back and forth, or I guess Twittering back and forth with one of our favorite guests, and she and her family just went down to the Galapagos. Imagine that.
That's so cool.
I know. So I'd like to welcome back to the show a return guest. Always love talking with you, Jen, and catching up with you. How you doing today, Jen, from Texas?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Not too bad. So you and your family went to the Galapagos Islands here recently.
We did. We were there over New Year's week.
Unbelievable. And just for everybody to know, we are recording this in 2021. So it wasn't one, because sometimes, our shows get aired way later. But so this was just a few weeks ago, which is pretty exciting.
So let's just start with the basics. Why the Galapagos? Why did you want to go there? I know you and your family have traveled, to several different, why not, different international destinations. And I know that, traveling with your children right now is kind of a high priority before they leave, which just goes by fast. It's crazy. But why the Galapagos?
Yeah, honestly, it wasn't really on our radar. But when we started the year, we'd come back from the Danube cruise, and we had big plans all year, obviously, all of which got canceled. So, we were just kind of plodding along, monitoring things like everybody else. We did go to Disney World for a few days in July when it first reopened, and had a good experience, and it was, pretty quiet and everything. And then got restless again and then went back over to Disney World in the beginning of November for my son's birthday. Because again, it was, kind of the only thing that was open, and it just felt a lot more crowded to us. We felt a little bit uneasy being there and so earlier in the year, we'd already kind of started to think, maybe hopefully for the end of the year, we could get back to international travel again. And honestly, to put it frankly, Ecuador was one of the few places accepting U.S. travelers. So, and my daughter had been, actually her Spanish teacher is from there, and she'd, been studying a lot about it, and kind of coincidentally, and had been talking about it kind of every day. And so I thought it was, like I said, not on our radar. We'd been interested in going back to Asia and Europe, probably a bunch of other places before there. But I thought, well, it's not something I've ever considered, and looked into it, and we love animals. So I thought, well, why not if we can get there safely? So it was the sort of luck, really.
How old are your children that went with you?
They're now 9 and 12.
So it was your whole family that went, your husband?
Yeah, just our nuclear family, the four of us. Mm-hmm.
So as you started to look into going to the Galapagos, there's a lot of different ways to go there. My wife and I went down to Ecuador before kids and spent some time in the Amazon, and pretty much everybody that we spent time with in this eco lodge had either gone to the Galapagos or were going to the Galapagos, and we never did, which has always been kind of like one of our regrets. But, when you started doing the research as far as how to visit the Galapagos, how did you come up with the tour company that you went with?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was trying to remember how we, went about it exactly. Often I use Adventures by Disney if it's someplace that I'm I'm not that familiar with. We've had obviously good success with them. They're obviously not running anything now. So the first one I think I really looked hard at was National Geographic Expeditions. And they partner with, I think it's called Lindblad, and do some expedition trips. And we had actually put a deposit down and everything because they were going to do a kind of a bubble trip where you flew into Miami, you had to test, then fly into Miami, and they were going to sequester everybody in a hotel and test everybody there themselves, and then charter a private plane directly to San Cristobal in the Galapagos and run the ship at half capacity. And they had it all planned out, and they think within a few days of putting the deposit down, they canceled. And I don't know, I think it was, my guess is kind of lack of enough interest to go to that much trouble to do all that. And so this was another company I looked at, EcoVentura, had gotten really great reviews, had run one trip at least over the summer and had good success. They only do Galapagos cruises, nothing else, so it's very specialized. The more I read about them and the more I looked into it, it seemed like probably the best alternative. Obviously for us, the major issue, other than, the health and safety concerns these days, is motion sickness, honestly. We are, unfortunately, a very motion sickness prone family, especially my daughter. She gets kind of motion sick, walking in circles sometimes. So that was the big hesitancy. I didn't know how she would do. Most of the ships, the Galapagos has very strict limits on the size of ships they let cruise around the islands. I think the largest, I want to say, is maybe 100 passengers. While we were there, it was interesting because we saw a lot of the ships that were sitting there, unused at this time. Like we saw the Celebrity ships, and because I think the Celebrity one might be the biggest they allow. So it's a much different feel than being on one of the big ocean liners like Disney. Spoiler alert, she did get motion sick quite a bit.
Oh, no.
So it may, I don't, as much as we'd love to go back, we'd probably try a different method of doing it. Maybe on one of the bigger ships like Adventures by Disney's going to use, or like I said, National Geographic or Celebrity, because, the smaller ones, obviously you're going to feel the motion a lot. And we did the remote itinerary. You spend a lot more time, getting to the more remote islands. It was amazing because we went to the islands that most people don't see, but it was definitely hard on her. She didn't have problems every day, all day, but definitely she had times where she was really, she was hurting a little bit. So
what medication do you give her? And I guess, is she your 9-year-old or your 12-year-old?
He's my 12-year-old. My 9-year-old's fine, no issues. Well, you know what worked really well for me, because I do get motion sick sometimes, even on DCL, like that very first day. I took the non-drowsy Dramamine, the meclizine-based one, and I would take it, the evening each day, even though it's not supposed to make you as drowsy. And I did great. Even you take a lot of panga rides on these little inflatable motor-powered craft to do a lot of the wildlife viewing, or just to get to the beaches, because these are all like, the access is pretty, it's difficult unless you take a little small craft to get to some of these beaches and hikes. So even with those, and even with all the snorkeling, was pretty much deep water off the panga. So I did great. It worked like a charm for me. And so I did that with her, but she would still get some breakthrough sickness. And so she would take her regular drowsy Dramamine, which works for her, but then, you're tired. So it was a tough call.
Have you tried, because she is old enough, obviously you're a doctor, these things, but so they say you could take up to 2 a day. So sometimes during the really bad days on DCL, I would take one, or on any cruise line, take one at night and one in the morning.
Yeah.
And that mostly seems to help. Did she also use the armbands at all?
The only thing I kind of wish maybe I'd try with her at some point is the scopolamine patch, but I was nervous to try that for the first time when we're out of the country. There's just a lot of, I'd feel better about trying that with her on DCL or something where we were just cruising out of Port Canaveral or whatever, or to test it even home beforehand. Because, some people get some substantial side effects from that. But
let's kind of stick with that just a little bit quick. I know that when we have traveled down to Ecuador, when we were living up in Seattle at the time, the University of Washington has a travel clinic. and they kind of specialize. You make an appointment with them, tell them where you're going, and they'll kind of set you up with different vaccines that you might need or medications, malaria pills, hepatitis, that type of stuff. Did you have to do anything ahead of time for that to go down to Ecuador?
No, you don't. We just, like I said, they have fairly strict testing. I mean, you have to test to travel to Ecuador within negative within 10 days with a PCR test.
Was that all 4 of you?
Yes, all 4, even the kids. But the Galapagos, you actually have to test negative within, I want to say it's 72 hours maybe. The company said, well, you can just take the test within 72 hours. That'll cover both requirements. And I thought, well, first of all, this was the first time I bought travel insurance. But then I also thought, well, I don't want to test positive within a few days of going. And so we actually did a round of tests. We did, starting about 10 days before, we went through several rounds of testing just to make sure. I mean, Chris and the kids were kind of already, working and schooling from home, so their exposure is limited. But I'm in healthcare, so obviously, even though I'd gotten my first round of vaccine, we all kept testing. That helped obviously give us some peace of mind. And then we're very conscious about wearing masks. And the fascinating thing to me was how much more seriously I think a lot of other countries were managing the coronavirus or taking it seriously compared to us. I mean, when we got to Quito's airport, first of all, it was a beautiful airport. It's pretty new. And I mean, you got off the plane, everybody answered questions, got temperature checks, your testing was reviewed. They made sure they had ways of contacting you. And it was just very well organized. And then throughout being in the city, I mean, when you did go out to eat, which the restaurants were open, but I mean, some of the waiters, I think, were in full hazmat suit. So maybe that's just because we were Americans, so they were rightly. Right. But I mean, they were thrilled to have some tourists back finally, but because there weren't very many. But everybody was just very conscious about, wearing your mask when you were
wearing them properly. Were
yes,
they wearing them properly?
Exactly. Yeah. So
my biggest pet peeve.
Yeah. So it was actually kind of a welcome change. So at least I felt like, and when we went to the hotel and checked in, I mean, they wrote down our passport information, wrote down everything, checked temperatures. Everybody was constantly sanitizing your hands. So yeah, it was pretty impressive.
So you guys fly into Quito and then make your way out to the Galapagos to meet the ship.
EcoVentura has 2 itineraries, an A and a B. Which one did you pick and why?
Well, I don't think we had a choice, to be honest, because okay. I think they were only running the B that week. They actually did run both their smaller ships, the Origin and the Theory. We were on the Origin. They said, obviously, this was like I think really the first week they'd really been back up and running both ships. And they said, the itineraries are really actually set by the Galapagos. They don't have much control over things. And so between EcoVentura and the Galapagos, the itineraries were changed, so we could only visit uninhabited locations, right? So normally you go to like the Darwin Research Center and see the tortoises there, and you go to some of the inhabited islands, but that was all scrapped, which, I think was a good way to do things. But we basically did follow most of itinerary B because that is the more remote islands. Those are the more volcanic islands. It's mainly the north and western portions. So, for instance, that's not what you do with the new Adventures by Disney Expedition Cruise, which focuses on the inhabited islands and then the southernmost islands. So the southern islands are, for instance, Española and Floriana, which were the only 2 we didn't make it to. So something to do one day, maybe. But yeah, they ran the 2 ships. One of the ships, I think, had an extended family that booked it. And then both ships had, I think, 8 cabins, so they can potentially hold up to 16 people. But our ship, there were supposed to be 2 families of 4 and then 1 couple from Mexico. The 2 families were from the U.S., and one of the families never showed up. So I don't know if they had a positive test or they just decided against it or what happened with them. So it ended up just being our family of 4 and then this young couple from Mexico.
And then were your kids in a cabin adjacent to yours?
Yeah, we had 2 connecting cabins. Yeah, the cabins are beautiful on those ships. They're spacious and the bathrooms are really nice. The only thing I really missed is the storage. There's no under the bed storage. It makes you appreciate DCL. I mean, we had our suitcases kind of just sitting next to the bed the whole time.
Before we get into like some of the other basics of the cruise, what would you say? I mean, because there's a lot of snorkeling. You're going on the inflatables out to the different islands and everything like that. Mm-hmm. Did they give an age range as far as kids' abilities to be able to do some of the things? Do you have a sense on that?
Yeah, I don't think they gave a strict age range, but yeah, I would say, obviously you have to know your own kid, but the motion sickness issue is definitely a consideration. And then just, I'd say my son was probably the youngest I would take a kid, because seeing the animals was amazing and that was captivating for all of us. But still, there's hiking, the snorkeling's deep water snorkeling. So my daughter and I loved that. I was there. I did that every day. And my daughter did some of it because it was hard for her to be on the Panga, when she wasn't snorkeling. So, and the snorkeling, it's actually, the water is, I think, remarkably cold. You don't anticipate how cold it is. I mean, it requires wetsuits. So it's just not, it'd be hard to do with somebody who had never done snorkeling and a kid where we're having to do everything for them with that. I mean, that'd be really challenging, I think. And then the hikes, they were really enjoyable, but, still, you're not going to want to carry a kid even for a little bit of that. They have to be able to walk. And then one of the amazing things about the Galapagos is you can't be there unsupervised. You have to have an official park naturalist with you, which was great because, we had just 6 of us, with our own. Cool. Yeah. The older the kid is and the more they can pay attention and take in, what she's saying and teaching, the more they're going to get out of it. My kids are pretty good about that, but obviously they're still kids, so the attention tunes in and out. But that's okay. They would wander around and look at some of the animals, and then their attention would come back, and they'd listen to her for a while, and then they'd wander, versus the adults. We're just kind of captivated the whole time. Violet obviously loved being on the land, so she was, she did great on all the hikes and everything. I think Garrett, there were a couple of the hikes where it was warmer, and he was like, oh, I'm hot. So those are kind of all things you have to consider. It definitely, but like I said, this is not a trip necessarily I would have taken at this age. I might have waited a couple of years, but this is where we found ourselves, and it was amazing. And I certainly, we had a great time, but it's definitely something to keep in mind. And what kind of activities your kids like. If you have big snorkelers, it's a great trip because you snorkel, or you have the opportunity to snorkel every day. I would go snorkel, and either both the kids would kind of rest in the cabin in between the hikes, or Violet would come with me. Because usually you had a...
Yeah, what did your days look like?
Yeah, after breakfast, usually you had a hike in the morning, or a nature walk, or whatever, however you want to call it, depending on what the activity is. And then there was an opportunity to snorkel, and the naturalist would go with you and snorkel, and she would say, oh, look at this, or look at that. And then you would have lunch, take a short break, and then there'd be usually sometimes another chance to snorkel, or a chance to do, they had 2-person little kayaks, which I did with both kids at one point, or you could stand up paddleboard, or there would sometimes just be a panga ride for a beach or a cliff or something that was not accessible to land at. And then you'd have kind of a second hike in the afternoon before dinner.
So kind of organized stuff in the morning, a little bit of free time to kind of do what you want, and then maybe another organized thing later in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Did you have much of a choice? I guess it's so small. It wasn't like they were offering, hey, you could do this, or that. It was kind of, what they had available.
When the ship's full, there's, 16 people and 2 naturalists. So we had 6 people and 1 naturalist. But I think even when it's full, the itinerary is the itinerary because, like I said, they don't actually set it. The park sets it. So ours pretty closely followed their normal itinerary B, but we had some substitutions, obviously, because we had to avoid any populated areas.
Did you guys wear masks during all of the activities and during, clearly not snorkeling?
We wore masks on the boat. The crew was excellent about it. Everybody in the crew always had on their masks. We did, the only time we took ours off after about a day or two of kind of gauging, what was okay and what wasn't, was on the hikes. Like if we were our naturalist always had hers on, and if we got within, like I said, about 6 feet of her to listen to her talk or whatever, we would put ours on. But that was kind of, if you were outside, doing an activity, then that was okay. But anytime you were on the Panga, for instance, because you're in, a fairly close quarters, or you're in the boat just walking around, if you leave your room, you put it on. So, I think it's probably what we'll see, I imagine, when the big ships eventually return to, would be something like that.
Let's stick with kind of the adventures you guys had. We don't have to go day by day, but what are the things that I enjoyed about the Eco Lodge we stayed at was we would do stuff during the day. We'd have dinner together, and then in the evening, after people are kind of relaxing, one of the naturalists would kind of get us together and talk about what we did and then what we were going to do the next day. Did they kind of do that for you guys?
Yeah, our naturalist, her nickname was Ceci. She'd been a naturalist for a long time, and then had taken a few years off to, raise her kids, and then had come back. And so she was, and this is the first time she'd been back since March, and so she was just so excited to be back and, see the animals and, start kind of teaching again. And so, every night. Mm-hmm.
Back from where? Where did she go?
Had been working since March, right? Because there hadn't been any tourism.
But are these people that live in Ecuador?
She does, yeah. She lives in Ecuador. Yeah. So every evening she would kind of talk about what we'd seen and what we'd done that day. And then she'd always had a little slideshow. And then she'd show, where we were going next, what we should see, what we would hope to see if we got lucky. And then what like I said, the activity possibilities could be, if you wanted to kayak or snorkel so that was really helpful, because then especially it just kind of helps everybody kind of keep track of what they've done and kind of plan. And then we could talk about, who wants to do what the next day. And
did the other couple you were with seem to want to do the same? Like, were you guys all kind of in agreement of how
I
do
would
the
say
activities?
We were friendly with them, but obviously, number one, you're not really hanging out with people right now, right? And number two, they're in a very different life space than we are, right? We're a middle-aged couple with two young kids, and they're a young, probably newly married couple who, and they were, I would say, the hikes we all did together, the snorkeling, it often would just be me and that couple and our naturalist. So, which was good because they were advanced snorkelers, clearly. So that gave them, I think, a little more freedom than when we brought my daughter. That's a little bit different pace that we have to go at. And then they did take one afternoon on their own and had a private diving excursion that they went on. So that was a possibility, right? They had chartered a dive boat, and then they picked them up at the ship and took them and brought them back. And then we had one afternoon where I think they were tired. So one of the last things we did was we went to this beach called Sombrero Chino, because it was named after, apparently it looks like a Chinese hat. I mean, I think it was our last full afternoon on the ship, and it was just four of us and our naturalist, and it was this beautiful beach, just with sea lions lounging everywhere, and the kids were playing in the water and building sandcastles, and then the sea lion would come and sit on the sandcastle, and I mean, it was really just magical. So when else, I guess, in your life are you going to have that experience? But for the most part, I would say we kind of did the same activities. When we kayaked, it was just me and the kids usually. They weren't, I think that's when they would take their break.
Well, let's just continue with the adventures. You don't have to go through every single day and what you did, Jen, but what were some of the highlights that maybe you enjoyed? You talked about, obviously, that last day being on the beach with the sea lions, but maybe some of the things that you saw surprised you, and maybe something from your kids' perspectives that they enjoyed.
Yeah, I think just the landscape is amazing, which I tried to read a little bit, obviously, before I went, but since it's, they're volcanic islands with basically no fresh water. I mean, it's just, the first place we went was an island which most people don't go to because it's so far north. It's called Genovesa, and it just looked like a moon rock with these wintry, almost dead-appearing trees, and it was just covered in birds. And I had never had any interest in birds, honestly, in my life. I love animals, but I thought, I don't know, birds, but... So it was covered with the boobies, the Nazca and the red-footed boobies, which, the islands are famous for. And one of the predators, the short-eared owl. And, Chris and I were talking about, why was it so fascinating? And I think just because, the animals aren't afraid of people because they're not harmed by people, because so few people are there and you're supervised by naturalists and you can't touch them or harass them. And so they're literally within feet of you and doing their normal thing. They were courting and tending their nest, and it was just, to see them, I guess, in the wild doing what they do. It was really fascinating. So that was an amazing place. And then when we went all the way over to Fernandina, which is the westernmost, the youngest island, which I think a lot of people don't make it to either, just, seeing the marine iguanas, which are the only, basically, iguana that operates underwater because of evolution and being stuck out there. They dive under the water for like 30 minutes at a time and feed on the algae. And so you would see them on the land doing their head bobbing and their stay away from me or behavior. And then you would snorkel and you'd see them underwater feeding on the algae. And so you were getting to see them kind of do everything. And to see all the animals, it's like, why can't we all just get along, right? It was see a rock, and you would have a sea lion and a pelican and the marine iguanas and penguins on it, all just sitting there,
Oh my God.
in harmony. I mean, it's sort of an indescribable feeling. I don't know. And so for me, it was seeing the animals. Like, I was so excited to see the little penguins. I mean, when else are you going to see a wild penguin? We saw an albino penguin, which Guide was like, I've never seen one of these. And then you would see them dive under the water and swim, which was very hard to get video of because they're so fast. Then I think the other big thing for me is we were nervous because obviously the classic animal is the giant tortoise, right? And we saw a ton of green sea turtles swimming in the water and mating, but we thought, we may not get to see the tortoise because a lot of people see it at the research center, right? Because they're or at the breeding centers because they're working to repopulate the giant tortoises after the whaling ships decimated the population. And so I kind of resigned myself to, okay, we may not see that since that part of the trip was canceled. But then on one of our walks, Tessie said, well, if this might be a chance to see them, we'll see. And we started by seeing the giant land iguanas. And then, within a few minutes, there's a giant tortoise sitting there, kind of hiding in the bush. And so we thought,
how big is a giant tortoise?
Well, they range in size, but I mean, I felt like it was like probably weighed more than my son. I mean, they were pretty big, at least several feet long. And so we saw one sitting there and I thought, thank goodness, we got to see one. And then on that walk, we must have seen 6 or 7, one of which she said had to be well over 100 years old.
Wow.
It was the oldest she thought she'd ever seen. So, and I don't know if that's just because the islands had been quiet and unvisited for a while but we just felt really fortunate to see all these animals. And it really, I think that's what the trip is about. So
when your kids look back on it, is that what they talk about as well?
Yeah, I think for them, my daughter and my son, they took turns naming everything. They would. So it was funny because they would anthropomorphize. They were like, "Oh, look at Charles. Look, conversation with Ned or whatever." But I think that grounds it for them and kind of makes it memorable and helps them think about whatever behavior the animal's engaging in. So, and it was funny for me. So.
Now, wait a minute. Wasn't Ned with you in France? Wasn't that who your daughter biked around with?
Oh, yeah, that might be. She probably good memory.
Christy, any other questions about the animals?
Well, I will say this. So, I don't even know if you know this, Steve, but the Galapagos was legitimately on my bucket list and is on my list. There was a travel agent training trip that I so wanted to go on. The price was amazing through Celebrity before they came out with the Flora. They have a pretty good Galapagos program, at least easy maybe for like the regular folk to go on.
I think my kids would have, for them being on one of those bigger ships would have been better. I think doing this remote itinerary on this ship was a great opportunity, but I would love to go back on, I think, one of the bigger ships and see the other islands that we didn't get to see, because I think the kids, that would be an easier experience for them, right? Less motion sickness, more activities, more traditional cruising.
Maybe more people.
Yeah.
Although for your situation, it was perfect, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah, I tried. I think it didn't work. I think we, didn't have the vacation time and couldn't figure out really how to just last minute go to Ecuador. But man, it was tempting. And I have not forgotten, and it is still out there. It will be a trip that I'll go on.
So before we talk about the ship, I guess I don't want to get too deep in the weeds. Is there anybody else besides Celebrity, as far as the major cruise lines that offer tours down there that Chrissy? Just Celebrity?
Right. And then, so of the main, the Royal Caribbeans and the Norwegians, right, just Celebrity.
Okay.
So, but then there's a bunch of those smaller, that right. Jen has already stated, the Lindbads and
I think there's some
National Geographic.
Maybe Silver Sea or something.
Yeah.
I mean, they were it's an expensive trip no matter what, but they were I don't know, really expensive.
That's okay. So, how's the water there? Is it pretty clear? So it sounds like it must be pretty clear to be able to see all the stuff that you did while you were snorkeling.
Yeah, it certainly varies depending on where you are. I think the main takeaway I had was how cold it was. I was surprised. I mean, you really have to have a wetsuit, especially snorkeling around some of those remote islands. It was very cold. I mean, that's how, right? I think they said the Galapagos penguin, it's the only penguin in the northern hemisphere because, like, when you're around, basically the equator cuts across the islands. So it's technically, we saw them in the northern hemisphere, right? But they rely on that cold water kind of coming up. I think it's the Humboldt Current. But it's amazing. I think the first day we jumped in, we saw these schools of hammerhead sharks, you know.
Wow.
So, I mean, I I was so mad because that was the only day I didn't bring my underwater camera because I thought, well, you know, I haven't snorkeled in a while. I need to get used to it again. And it took me a few days, but I think by halfway through, I was like ready to snorkel twice a day, every day. So I think if you're a big snorkeler, I mean, it's definitely, it's a great place to be just because between seeing the animals, you're not just seeing the usual kind of fish and sharks, which are cool, but you were, to see the sea turtles in the water, to see the birds, the penguins, and they have this thing called the flightless cormorant, which is basically a bird that kind of de-evolved, right? So it doesn't fly anymore because it just swims and it really doesn't have any land predators. So you would see it dart to the water and then it would climb out onto the rock and kind of put its little runty, wings out to dry, but it doesn't use the wings. So I think that was what was so cool, is to see the variety of the animals.
Did they provide the wetsuits for you? Did you have to bring anything like that with you?
They provided everything, yeah. Although I'm not sure. I'm not sure they have a lot of American-sized wetsuits. I mean, we're an average-sized family, and even so, Violet and I were like, "Oh my gosh," trying to get the wetsuit on and off. So it's a little bit of a chore. So if you have your own, but we don't snorkel very often. So yeah, we certainly.
Were they full wetsuits?
Yeah, they were whole body.
Anything else about the expeditions that you did, Jennifer? Maybe then we could circle back and talk about, just life on the ship, the food, and how that kind of compared maybe to Disney or whatnot.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, I think in general, it would be a hard trip, I think, if you have any kind of physical mobility issues. It's definitely not one you'd want to go on if you've got a bum knee, until your knee was better or that sort of thing. Just because, and for instance, Chris he is an urban person. he is not outdoorsy. So, and he did fine, but there's definitely, you are climbing over volcanic rocks sometimes, and you have a guide with you at all times. But definitely, I think, or if you're older, it'd be, a trip where you'd have to think about how much you could do. Although, Ceci was very good about saying, this is the kind of landing we're going to have. This is the type of shoes you want to bring. I would love to take my mom there one day. She loves to snorkel and she loves nature, and she would really enjoy it. But it's definitely something to think about. It's definitely a physically active trip.
Not a lay by the pool with your cocktail type of
No. Yeah. Yeah.
So how was life on the ship? Like, how did mealtime work? I mean, there were 6 of you, so... I mean,
obviously, for life on the ship, we probably didn't have the most typical experience. I'd say it was pretty quiet, but honestly, for me, I'm fairly introverted. It was really nice. Because, you would basically go sit up on the top. I would go sit up on the top deck when the kids were watching. It did have movies on demand, so the kids would watch a movie after lunch when they were resting. And I would take my Galapagos tour book to read about the animals up on the top deck, and I'd be the only one up there. So
did the deck have a hot tub or a
There was
pool?
A hot tub. The couple, for instance, would get in after they snorkeled just to warm up. I didn't really use it, but the upper deck was mainly, we ate up there a couple times, but it was mainly just beach chairs. But just to sit up there and relax and look at the scenery and read, I mean, as adults with kids and jobs, we don't get to do that too often, so that was kind of nice.
What was the weather like?
I thought we went at a good time of the year. It was we were on the kind of the cusp of the change of seasons, but I would definitely pick the cooler time of year if I were, well, I guess it depends on what you like, but Ceci said it can get pretty hot and pretty humid at times, but for us it was cool, dry. We didn't get any rain.
Cool, like 70 or cool, like 50 or...
It
Okay.
was water. But some of the hikes, I mean, it would be in the 80s and you would feel it because you were in the more desert areas of the island. So, obviously she was good about telling everybody to bring water and hats and whatnot. But I think, sticking to the cooler and drier season for most people would be preferable, I would imagine, unless you really, really are into the heat.
So the ship provided like water bottles for you guys to take off?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everybody got their own water bottle, and they had, water coolers where you could get your own water. We brought, the kids called it my adventure hat. Obviously I had one of the hats with a wide brim because I burn really easily. So lots of sunscreen. I mean, even though it wasn't hot, you're on the equator. So lots of sunscreen. But yeah, they provided pretty much everything: snorkels, masks, flippers, wetsuits, water bottles.
And then how did meal times work?
They were scheduled, just like on a regular cruise ship. The dining room, they had our family on one side and the couple across the dining room on the other side, just for social distancing purposes. And they did table service instead of buffet style, just because, obviously. But the food was excellent. Obviously, since there was such a small number of guests and a fairly small crew. I mean, the chef would come out occasionally and talk about the food, and it was really great. I mean, my kids are adventurous eaters, so when they got octopus or whatever for dinner, they were totally excited.
Sorry, you should see Christy's eyes right there.
Yeah, but you always had a couple choices. So
you could avoid the octopus if you wanted.
You could, yeah. I mean, my kids were into that. But for instance, Chris is allergic to shellfish, so he was not eating the lobster or whatever.
And they were able to handle that allergy well?
Yeah.
They had the ability?
Yeah, I think, in Japan, we were always kind of nervous because it was the communication around allergies is a lot more difficult. But, it wasn't an issue at all. Obviously, a lot of the crew spoke only Spanish, but many spoke, English fluently.
So kind of looking back on this cruise, before we touch on maybe some tips you'd give for somebody going down there, and I know this is a very different experience because it was just basically you and the other couple, your family and the other couple on there, but how would you kind of compare it to the Adventures by Disney experiences you've had with the other trips? Do you think, like maybe in normal times, do you see it being kind of similar as far as interactions as a group and whatnot?
It's interesting. I mean, I'm sure there's pluses and minuses to both. I think in general, the Adventures by Disney, even though, like I said, we're a somewhat introverted family, I think we always enjoy those more than we think because it does become fun to have that. The guides, I think, are great about getting everybody involved, and you kind of bond with other people in your group. And there's especially for the kids, there's a camaraderie with the other kids and the other adults. And so, I mean, I think the great thing about our experience, obviously, was it was so kind of quiet and intimate, and to be around all those animals, just a few of us, was amazing. But I think if we went back, which I would like to do, I think actually I'd be more interested in doing their original Ecuador itinerary, where you spend a little time in the Amazon like you did, Steve. And we'd like to see Quito more, and then just spend a few days in the islands. So for us, we'd want to do, they have like east, west, south, north, I think. We'd want to do the southern, right, and see those couple of southern islands that we didn't see. But if you're interested really only in the Galapagos, then I'm sure their new expedition ship, looking at the itinerary, it basically covers Santa Cruz and San Cristobal, which are the two main inhabited islands, and then those two southern islands. But it leaves out, those more remote islands, their brand new itinerary. But I'm sure it'll be well done and just a different experience.
And then looking back for somebody who's maybe booking this ABD or looking to do what you guys did, venture out beyond ABD, what advice would you give families? We talked quite a bit about, maybe being a little bit older so they can experience and do some of the stuff, but any other advice you would give families looking to go to the Galapagos?
Yeah, I think it just think about kind of what works best for your family and what you want out of it. I mean, I think for most families, ABD is going to be the best option, or National Geographic, or an itinerary maybe, or a cruise line where you get, maybe there's more options on the ship for kids' activities, but on the other hand, I mean, this was great. I mean, we got lots of attention, obviously, because
like basically a private tour to the Galapagos. I mean, that's amazing.
Exactly. And then we'd come back onto the ship after one of the excursions, and they'd have like a chocolate fondue pot, and Violet would just sit there thrilled with the fondue pot to herself, because the couple was like, "Yeah, we're gonna, go have some some alone time. And then we had, like I said, the guide was basically, you could talk to her the whole time and ask her questions and learn from her because, there were so few people, I guess, competing for her attention. So I think you just have to kind of consider, what you want out of it, and then look at the itinerary, because I think there's so many places you can go and see within the Galapagos. If there's certain things on your list that you definitely want to see, or islands you definitely want to stop in, you just have to make sure that you check the itinerary ahead of time to see where they're going, because it's variable.
Anything else we haven't touched on that you can think of, Jen?
I would just say, Quito was an amazing city. We spent a day there and didn't get to see half of what we wanted, and still, it was really. We walked around the old town. There's a basilica there where the gargoyles are all stone carvings of animals from the Galapagos rather than the traditional gargoyle. So you'd see the turtles. And that was amazing. And it's just had a beautiful interior. So we would love to go. But, obviously there was not a lot open too. So, but we would love to go back somewhere and spend some time there. We flew back out of Guayaquil and spent a little time walking around that city. But I think for us, Quito was definitely kind of the magical city. In Guayaquil, though, we did do a coffee tasting for Chris, so that was probably one of his highlights.
How did the coffee rate down there? Mm-hmm. How did the coffee rate down there for him?
Oh, it was great. Yeah, we definitely brought some back. Obviously, that's where a substantial amount of coffee comes from. So it was really fun to kind of do the tasting, and then they let the kids run the espresso machine, so they were pretty excited.
We loved Quito as well. It was just, we only spent 2 nights there. I wish we could have spent a few more. We went to the Old Town. I remember doing that, which was kind of interesting. Yep. I missed the gargoyles, but we did go to the Basilica. The only thing I will say about going to the Amazon, which was amazing, the experience, one thing that we got to see was the only freshwater dolphins. And what's kind of interesting, they would come up and swim like right next to the ship or the canoes that we were in. But they don't have eyes because the water's so dirty, they can't really see, so they use radar. Oh. For the most part, it's really tough to see animals in the Amazon. They kind of hide. So being out to the Galapagos, I think you have a much better. So we ended up seeing, I guess where I'm going with this whole story is we saw a lot of birds. And I didn't know that I'd be interested in birds either, but I love toucans. I found out that I love toucans. They're fun to watch fly.
Yeah, the sea lions you weren't obviously allowed to touch any of the animals. Hence one of many reasons you have a naturalist supervising you, because, they would get close enough where you could. But the sea lions, they just were so playful. They would, like you said, kind of dance and leap along our little panga. And one actually tried to jump in the panga right next to me after snorkeling one day. and she was like, "Get out of the boat." But
that would be so cool.
I know. I couldn't believe it. It jumped right in next to me, trying to get in the little panga. But yeah, that was what I wasn't sure what to expect, I guess. But the animals, they're just all around. And I think the only thing we saw just a couple of, but even seeing any was very lucky. We saw there's about 400 flamingos in the whole of the archipelago. And we saw a few in one of the lagoons one day. So that was really special because I think those are pretty unusual to see.
So I guess as we talked about, Christy, Adventures by Disney came out with expedition cruising. They've got 2 different itineraries, one of them going to the Galapagos, looking at the boat that they are using or going to be using. It's much bigger than the one that you were on, Jen. It does have a swimming pool, so you might be able to lounge by that pool, Christy, with your drink. And
Perfect.
But you want to talk a little bit about what Adventures by Disney is offering, Christy?
Yeah, and Jen talked about it a little bit, that it's going to not the more remote islands, but maybe more of the quote unquote main islands. It's a 8-night, 9-day trip. It goes to the Amazon as well. So I guess bird lovers and or those people who just want to see what is out there will get to see that experience. It's going to be like Jen described. You're going to need to be more active. So it is not just a tour of a city like you could find on a Disney cruise. You're actually going to do these hikes or going to do the expedition. It's an expedition cruise, and they name it that way because it is not a sit by the pool with your cocktail type trip. And so just always want to make sure people know that it is going to be more active. They do have some itineraries without children, or families can go. Steve, did you notice what the minimum age that they recommended?
I'll look it up here right now, but I just do have them pulled up. They had some 2021 sailings, one right at the very end of the year. That one's already sold out. And actually the summer of 2022, right when it's the hottest, huh, Jen?
Yeah.
It's sold out as well.
Hopefully the summer, it's interesting. I don't know totally. I think she said the worst time is actually kind of spring break time.
Okay.
Like March.
Mm.
So I think as you get the summer, it starts getting better in the summer. I want to say spring is like the worst time.
Maybe rainy and humid.
Yeah. And then it's interesting because I looked at the Antarctica one too, which, my family was like, because I thought, oh, that looks such a, but it's tough to know exactly what it entails because every day kind of said, and then you take an expedition, but it wasn't very specific. And maybe that's just because they don't know exactly. It depends on the day. I imagine there's a lot of variability in the conditions down there. But so versus, I think the Galapagos one, they had a more clear itinerary, at least on the website.
The one thing to note about the weeks that are sold out already, Steve, is that some people are going to put down deposits or are waiting to sort of see, but they may not go. For example, my family was booked on that trip for the summer, but then the big Europe trip, but because of some other plans we've made, we've decided, and I don't really know that any of those trips are happening anyway, but even still, it was once sold out and then another family could get in because we were able to cancel. So it's just like one of those, if you really want to go, even if it shows it's sold out, you should still look into it.
Yeah, I think especially these days, there's a lot of flux.
So I looked it up. They say the child has to be at least 8 years old at the time of travel to go to the Galapagos expedition cruise, and the recommended age is 8. So that kind of blends with what you're saying when you're saying like maybe 9 might be the limit you would have.
Younger, I would think, to make it a pleasant trip. Yeah.
The other thing they kind of point out too, and this is true, is Quito's high up in altitude. I can't remember what altitude it's at, but it's like Denver or higher. It's
the second highest capital in altitude, they said. Maybe first, I don't know, Peru maybe? I'm not totally sure, but yeah, the altitude's quite high. So we were a little concerned, but I didn't have any issues.
Yeah, so they kind of talk about extended hours of daily activity programming. I guess, as you said, Christy, this is an expedition type trip, a very active type trip, so it's one that you probably want to be in good shape for to be able to do it seems like, so, or to really take in all that it has to offer.
I mean, I don't think you have to be in good shape. Like, you don't have to run half marathons every other week, but
right.
You do have to be able to be active and move. Because I would argue that we're not in good shape in my family, but we could do this.
It's on, what you like to do. Like I said, my mom, she's older. I mean, near 70, but she likes to snorkel. She likes to hike. She loves animals. So for her, it's actually a better fit than even someone like Chris, who, like I said, he is a man of the urban disposition. So, but he was a good sport, and he did love the animals. But I just normally he would be one that, like for instance, Tokyo was his ideal trip because it was walking around the city all day, every day. And he and Violet can walk all day long without complaining. It's just they like to walk within a city.
Well, Jen, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your family's experience down to the Galapagos. It's always fun to catch up with you. And I put you on the spot and say, what's next for you? But this came out of nowhere, so you never know where your family's going to end up, do you?
Yeah, I mean, we live it day by day, but it's tough. I mean, it's tough for everyone right now. And obviously, we're hopeful with the vaccine. I mean, I think I've said before, I have no interest in cars, clothes, jewelry, etc. I like, going places and going to theater and movies and basically all the things we can't do right now. So even though I had obviously very mixed feelings about doing anything, we just tried to be responsible and as careful as we could. And obviously, even though there were so few tourists there, I mean, everybody in Ecuador was just so excited to have, any tourism resume at all. Very gracious and kind. So we felt very fortunate. And then we're just keeping our fingers crossed. We had the European cruise on DCL. We rescheduled from last summer to this summer. And then we have an Alaska cruise on DCL, and we're just praying one of them somehow goes, but it's a long shot probably.
Well, I'll keep our fingers crossed. So, Christy, any final thoughts before we get out of here today?
No, I thought this trip report was amazing, and now, of course, I need to make sure that in like 5 years, I make sure Galapagos is on that list still.
Yeah. Mike's a little older, right?
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Jen. Always fun to catch up with you. Always fun to hear what your family's up to. And when you guys get back from your next adventure, hopefully maybe this summer on one of those cruises, we'd love to have you come back on and talk about it.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All the best, and we'll talk to you soon.
Stay safe.
Well, that's going to wrap up our show today. Once again, I really want to thank Jen for coming back on and sharing her and her family's amazing trip as they cruised down to the Galapagos Islands this last December/January. And if you would like to find out more with the travel company that they used, EcoVentura Travel, that's ecoventura.com. I'll leave a link in the show notes down below. And this episode is being released February 2nd, 2021. And if you are around on Facebook with us tomorrow on the 3rd of February at 10 a.m. Pacific, that's 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we are going to do a live Coffee at the Cove episode, and we will be covering all the new releases that Adventures by Disney just released with their adventure cruising that they actually expedition cruising that they just released down to the Galapagos and also to the Antarctica and Patagonia, along with their river cruising adventures as well. So we'll touch on all of those. Come on over and join us if you can. Once again, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 a.m. Pacific on February 3rd over on Facebook. If you've enjoyed the show and would like to come on and share your family's adventures, either through Disney Cruise Line, Adventures by Disney, or Run Disney, or if you've taken a different kind of travel like Jen and her family did and think that our listening group would enjoy it, our listeners out there just love all types of travel, especially cruising, you can reach out to me, Steve, at DCLpodcast.com, and we'll get you on. If you have an opportunity to do so, we sure would appreciate it if you'd go over to iTunes and leave our show a review. That helps us get the show known a little bit better in the Disney community, the cruising community, and the travel community as well. Thank you for each and every one of you who've taken the time to go over and do that. As always, want to take an opportunity to thank our Patreon supporters who help support this show. They're the ones who help bring this show to you each and every week. So if you'd like to learn more about becoming a Patreon supporter, you can go over to patreon.com/DCL podcast and find out all the information there. Well, between now and our next show, if you are heading out on your next vacation, staycation, or just some type of adventure from the living room to the kitchen, whatever it is you may be doing, just be safe out there, be well, and just know that we will be back next week with another edition of the DCL podcast, and we look forward to seeing you then. Goodbye, everybody, and we'll see you next time on the DCL podcast. The DCL podcast is not affiliated with the Disney Cruise Line, Walt Disney Company, Adventures by Disney, or Run Disney. All of the opinions expressed on our shows are those of the hosts and the guests who appear on the show. If you have any questions about any of these products, please contact the Walt Disney Company.